My name is Bruce Gardner, 15 Huffman Road, Port Murray, New Jersey. I was born and raised here in Port Murray. Been a lifelong resident, except for the years I was in the Navy, and I lived up on Montana Mountain for a couple of years, but then moved back here when I had a chance to buy my aunt and uncle's house down on Main Street. Let's see, I have a brother who's younger, and I have two sisters that are younger. My mom was originally from Boston, moved here to Port Murray when she was young. My father was born and raised here, along with my aunt and my uncle. They were all born in my grandparents' house. And Dr. Funk, who lived on the corner down here, delivered all of them in the house. Nobody went to the hospital back then. My grandparents lived here their whole lives. My grandmother was actually born here on Huffman Road, just 2 houses away from where I live now, and she had a twin brother, Uncle Clyde, and she used to tell us stories of when they were younger. The canal was still filled with water. They would ice skate and swim, and just, you know, it was a nice area to live, and they loved it here. My grandfather, I'm not sure exactly where he lived before him and my grandmother built the house down there, but he did live in Port Murray, and he had a sister, Lillian, and they all sort of lived right next to each other. There was 3 houses that belonged to the Gardners at one time, or Hamlins, which my Aunt Lillian married Hamlin. And I ended up growing up in the one house that my aunt and uncle owned at the time. And then years later, after my aunt had died and my uncle was getting up in age, he sold me the house. So I lived there for a few years and actually still own the place. And then I met my wife Kathy, who lives here on Huffman Road. And a funny story about that was her and my father knew each other. And she had a problem here. There was a groundhog that was chasing the horse and donkey around that she had out in the paddock here. And she thought it was ravaged, so she calls my dad to come up to take care of the groundhog because she knew he was a hunter and everything. And well, it was Sunday, and Dad was having Sunday dinner, and he says, I ain't coming up. He says, I'll send Bruce up. And I had been divorced at the time, and I came up and took care of the groundhog. I ain't sure where it went, but it's gone. And we got talking, and one thing led to another. She asked me if I would, you know, fix this, fix that, and because I'm sort of like the handyman here in Port Murray. I work for several people that I've known for years. The Jannons, he was my 4th grade school teacher. I still work for them, help them out around the house. Mrs. Jannon is 99. And Mr. Jannon just turned 90. I helped the Fellers out. Mrs. Feller and Mr. Feller I've known since as long as I can remember. I went to school with their son John. And so Kathy had me doing things here, and one thing led to another, and eventually we got together and we got married. And she hasn't had no problems with groundhogs since I've been here. I take care of them. I went to Mansfield Township Elementary School. I was the first kindergarten class down there back in, I believe it was 1962. Yeah, I would have been 5 years old, yeah. And then went all the way through school there, and then went to Warren Hills Junior High in Washington, and then the Warren Hills Regional High after I got out of the junior high. After I got out of the school, actually when I was in school, I joined the Navy when I was 17. My parents signed for me. I joined under a delayed enlistment program, which let you join the Navy and be in the reserves until you graduated high school. And then I went into the Navy in August of 1975. Boot camp was in Orlando, Florida, which was an adventure in itself because Orlando, Florida in August, September, and October is brutally hot. And it actually was kind of neat down there because that's where the Waves actually went to boot camp. So we had a sister company, which was a real sister company. And at the end of graduation at boot camp, we had a 3-day pass party down there, and the girls and guys all got together at basically a hotel. Basically, they rented the floor and everything, and just had a big party for graduation, which was kind of neat. After that, I went to Chicago, Great Lakes. I went to the machinist mate A school. That's what I put in for, to be a machinist mate. I loved working on mechanical things. When I was younger here in Port Mary, I worked at Mayberry's lawnmower shop, doing stupid little stuff, changing oil, sharpening mower blades, you know, cleaning the decks and everything. Just crazy work, and Donald would pay us, and eventually I bought some mini bikes and motorcycles and ran them like crazy around here, down the railroad tracks and back at Pyronics. And when I was out there in A school, I did very good in A school. I think I passed with 100%. So they asked me to stay on out there to be like a tutor to guys that weren't as mechanically inclined. So I stayed out there for, I guess it was around 9 months before I had to report to my submarine, tutoring guys and stuff like that. And it was definitely different than Orlando. It was brutally hot in the summer though, and in the winter it was unbelievably cold. We were right on the lake, and it was brutally cold out there in the winter, and windy. I guess that's why they call it the Windy City. After that, I reported to Norfolk, where our submarine was in dry dock getting refitted. Basically, that's what they're just repairing everything, putting new stuff in. And then we went out on sea trials for a month, where basically you test everything out. You go down to test depth, you do this, you shoot torpedoes, you basically just test everything out. And then we got back to our home base, which was in Groton, Connecticut. And I believe our first deployment was to the Mediterranean, which has a funny story to it, because we were trying to sneak into the Mediterranean at night in December. I was the lookout in the conning tower, which is the top of the submarine, and me and an officer were up there. We were just looking out to make sure we didn't run into any other boats or anything. And a big wave hit us on the front of the nose of the submarine and dropped us down around 80 feet into the water. Well, they closed the hatch on us because water was coming into the submarine itself, and instead of losing the whole boat, they figured it was better to lose 2 guys than the whole boat. But at the time, I could look out and I could see Morocco, I guess it was, on the one side, and Africa on the other. And I'm thinking, that ain't that far away. If I really have to swim, I probably can. It's only about a mile, and I'm a pretty good swimmer. But I hung on, and me and the officer hung on. And when we came up, we were chest high in water, and we had to wait for them to drain all the water out of the conning tower. And when we got back down into the boat, of course, we took a lot of ribbing, you know. We didn't need you guys anyhow, you know, we were trying to get rid of you. And but it was a unique experience. Kind of scary, very scary, that's for sure. And when we were over there, we got to visit Italy, Greece, Portugal. While I was in the Navy the whole time, I think I've seen every country in Europe except for France on our different voyages, because that's where we were stationed in the North Atlantic, basically. Then in 1979, we were going on a mission. No one knew what it was. No, they wouldn't tell us anything at all. Nobody except the captain and the navigator knew where we were going. And we took extra stores on and everything, and we got out to sea, and they told us, well, we're going to the North Pole. And everybody was kind of like, you're kidding. but they weren't kidding. We went up underneath the ice cap, and while we were there, we had to keep track of where the ice was like 3 feet thick or less in case there was an emergency on the boat and we had to break up through the ice. So we got up to the North Pole, or as close to it geologically as you could, I guess, and we did a big circle around the North Pole so we could say we circumnavigated the Earth. And on our way up there, we crossed the Arctic Circle, and there's a initiation. It's called a blue nose. You become a blue nose when you cross the Arctic Circle. So they had this initiation party. It was basically like a frat party. They brought you up through the thing with a noose around your neck. You had to eat sea worms, which was basically spaghetti with a lot of salt on it. You had to pull a cherry out of King Neptune's belly button. It was just fun, and it was like a frat party thing, just to initiate you to be a blue nose. And then you got your certificate saying you went across the Arctic Circle. We got up to the North Pole as close as we could geologically, I guess, and found a place where the ice was 3 feet thick or less. Broke up through the ice, and they let guys out, about 10 or 12 of us at a time in foul weather gear, because obviously it's very cold up there. I believe it was around 60 below zero at the time, but we got to go out. They put a little flag up. We took pictures. Everybody did a little shot. Actually a helicopter came from I'm not sure where, and they took pictures of the boat sticking out of the ice and everything. And I think they brought some secret papers to tell us where we're going after we leave the North Pole. But it was a unique experience, and it was beautiful up there. There was really not a lot of snow. Maybe a 1/4 inch of snow just blowed around all over the place, but the ice was so crystal clear and blue that you could see down 10, 12 feet through it, because there was no pollution up there. It was oddly beautiful, very beautiful. And after we got out of the North Pole, we went back underneath the ice and we headed over to Russia, which was our mission. We found out that we were going over to Russia to check on one of their little experimental 2-man submarines, deep diving submarine, robotic type thing, I guess. And we were over in Russia taking pictures of this thing. Every time it would go out to sea, we'd go out and follow it, take pictures, track it with sonar, and follow them back in. Well, the one time we were following them back in to the harbor where they kept this little thing, and their battleship, the Kiev, was stationed in this harbor, and the Kiev went active on sonar, which means it pinged out, and they knew we were there. And all of a sudden, all these boats start coming out, and we went out into the ocean and did like a figure 8 and sort of sat down on the bottom a little bit. And you could hear off in the distance like explosions, and the boat would rock one way and the boat would rock the other. They were out there looking for us because, well, back then we weren't very friendly with the Russians, and we had been spying on them basically. And they were dropping depth charges looking for us. And the captain, he wasn't really a joking type guy, but we went up, we surfaced, and he could see all the boats, miles away, dropping depth charges. He goes, they don't know where we are. We're going back in. Everybody thought, you're crazy. But we did. We went back in, and they had no idea where we were after they pinged out the one time. And that was another kind of scary, but it was exhilarating. It was like, it just showed you how much more technologically advanced we were than they were, because we knew where they were and they really didn't know where we were. And it was unique. And then we got to visit Belgium, Germany, Amsterdam. Amsterdam was, wow. If you ever get to Europe, back then Amsterdam was very unique, very liberal. Of course, we had been out to sea for 5 months, so everybody has a handful of money, and we're just running around Not like wild men, but pretty much close to it. Put the women and children away. It was unique when we were in Germany because we were over there during the Oktoberfest. And at the time we pulled into Wilhelmshaven, one of their northern ports, and we were the first U.S. nuclear submarine to ever pull in there. And they greeted us like we were conquering heroes. They had stuff set up in the town square for us, kegs of beer, food, you name it. It was great. It was the best 3 days I've ever had in my life over there. It was wonderful, and they loved us. The Americans could do no wrong, no matter what we did. We could do no wrong, and it was a unique experience there too. That was very nice. Oh, on the way back from Germany, we were out at sea. We had to do like maintenance on certain things on the boat. We would come up to periscope depth, take in fresh air, and they grease things and everything to make sure all the periscopes and the snorkels and the masts and everything were working. Well, we were up there. One guy greased the periscope, and then we went back down around 600 feet. When we got down to 600 feet, he had forgot to close the grease valve. And the pressure from the outside water actually blew back through the grease, the grease seal, into the boat. It was probably the size of your pinky, this grease fitting. But when the water comes in at 600 feet under that amount of pressure, it was unreal. It was like a bullet shooting through the control plate, the control tower, or whatever they called it then. And I was actually driving the boat. I was the helmsman, and there was another guy with me that he controlled the rudders, and I controlled the up and down of the boat. And we just looked at each other and was like, we got to go up, because every alarm in the boat was going off at the same time. There was mass confusion because it was just like a small fire hose under tremendous pressure, just hitting everything, bouncing off the walls, bouncing off the equipment. Of course, a lot of electrical equipment. And so we went up, and we knew enough to stop at 100 feet, because if you go all the way up and there's an oil tanker up there, everybody's done. But we knew enough to stop at 100 feet, and by the time we got up there, then the pressure had subsided, and somebody jumped up there and closed the valve, and everything got back to normal. But that was scary. I mean, every alarm in the boat was going off. The diving alarm, the nuclear alarm, you name it, the fire alarm. And nobody really knew what was going on in the rest of the boat except for us that was in the control room. But after that, that's when my enlistment was up. I came back home. Let's see, I lived in Port Mary here again with my parents for about a year and a half, about a year. Got a job down at the American Can, where I've been working there for 35 years now. My mother worked there. She worked there for 37 years. Of course, it's changed names and hands several times, but it's paid the mortgage, and it's a good place to work as far as I'm concerned. They've been in business for quite a while, and hopefully they'll be in business till I retire.
How old was your grandmother when she died?
My grandmother was 105, almost 106. She was a month away from being 106. But yeah, the story she used to tell us about when they were kids, it wasn't an easy life, that's for sure. I mean, they didn't have electricity at some point. In fact, when I was younger and lived on Main Street, my grandparents didn't have indoor plumbing. There was actually an outhouse on the property. And it was a double outhouse because at one time my aunt and uncle didn't have indoor plumbing. So the two families shared the double outhouse. And they had a coal stove. The running water was basically water that came down from a well up on the canal. They didn't have a well pump of any kind. It was me and my brother's job when we got older to take care of the coal stove, bank it, and take the coal out and everything. And in the mornings, we would have to empty the piss pots that they would keep in the house overnight to do their business and take it out to the outhouse and scrub them out and clean them out.
Well, your grandmother saw the Morris Canal in operation.
She saw it in operation. I do believe she did, yes. Yep.
Because the barges, well, the mules used to walk right behind the house.
Yep.
On the towpath.
Right. Well, and this barn right down here on the next property down actually used to house the mules. And this house at one point was, they called it the boatman's house. I guess the boatman lived here, more than one, and they would switch on and off. Like one would, do his, wherever they took it to Peaburg, and on his way back, he would get dropped off, and the next guy would go down and they would change the mules here. So the barn down there was where they kept the mules, and this is where the boatmen stayed with their wives and children and stuff.
Now tell us a story when your Uncle Clyde saved Tom Mayberry from drowning.
Oh,
in the
yes.
canal.
Yes, my grandmother told me this, and Alice Mayberry even related it to me, that her father told her about it. But they were swimming down here on Huffman Road.
In the Morris Canal.
In the Morris Canal. I guess Tom was down there swimming. He was younger than my Uncle Clyde, but my Uncle Clyde just lived up the road from the Morris Canal here with my grandmother and her parents, and he heard somebody screaming and hollering, "Help, help, help," and he ran down and pulled Tom Appleby out of the Morris Canal and basically saved his life. But my grandmother used to tell us when they were younger, in the summertime, they would swim in the canal and they would dive into the canal and go down to the bottom of the canal and pull the coal up out of the canal that had fallen off the barges to use for the coal stoves in the winter, so they didn't have to buy it. I guess my Uncle Clyde was a pretty good swimmer, diver, and he went down and got Tom, I guess, because he had actually went under at the time. I don't know if he did CPR on him or whatever, but I'm sure something like that, We did a lot of hunting and fishing. Everybody was, everybody knew each other, and
A lot of trapping, too.
a lot of trapping. Yep, I did a lot of trapping when I was younger. Morris Canal, it was perfect for it. The muskrats loved the soft banks. They make their dens in them. We did a lot of trapping, and it was good because everybody worked together. I mean, and as a kid, there was always something you could do here. If you wanted to make some money, you could mow somebody's grass. In fact, the house I'm living in now with my wife, Kathy, Mrs. Hendershot used to own it when I was younger. And she had all these gardens and bushes and everything, and I would mow the grass for her. Well, she had a push mower, didn't have any motor on it. It was the old rotating blade mower, and it was like exercise. You just run around with this push mower through these little gardens and everything, and in the wintertime, the 2 or 3 of us would get together, we'd throw our shovels on our shoulders, go up and down the road, and ask everybody if they wanted their driveways shoveled or their sidewalks. You get 50 cents, $1, whatever it was. And at the time when we were younger, the Port Murray Dairy was actually still in operation. And in the summertime, when we were out of school, we would go over there early in the morning before they got all the trucks loaded up, and the guys would give us little containers of chocolate milk or regular milk, whatever you wanted, lemonade, and and a lot of people here in Port Murray worked there. Most of them just walked across the street.
Now, the brickyard was still in operation, too, at that time.
I believe it was back then when the dairy was still going, yep. My father actually worked there when he was much younger. In fact, probably everybody in Port Murray at one time or another worked there, making the terracotta pipes and the bricks.
Pyronics is the old brickyard, Port Murray brickyard.
Yep. And at the time, I guess they were making flares and something to do with the Vietnam War.
Practice ammunition, right?
Practice ammunition and stuff like that, and something in one of their buildings caught on fire and basically blew the place to smithereens. But I remember as a kid, when I lived on Main Street here, all the fire alarms going off. There was helicopters flying around, and you could hear and see these, I guess they were 55-gallon drums of whatever chemical or explosives device flying up in through the air. Me and my brother actually crawled out on the porch. We had a deck on our house, and we crawled out from our bedroom and was watching it from the top of the patio, basically. And people didn't know what to do. They were talking about evacuating everybody because none of the fire trucks could get down close enough to even try to put the fire out. And as a young kid, you're like, wow, it's like the 4th of July, but it really ain't the 4th of July.
Yeah. So you could see barrels blowing up in the air
going up into
from
the
here.
air. Yeah. Yep. And like I said, they had, well, there was news helicopters, which back in that day, it was in the 60s, was like unheard of around here. We didn't even see helicopters around here, but they had the whatever news it was, WPIX or whatever, Jersey News. But it was scary because I just remember they had fire trucks everywhere, but none of them could get down into to do anything. I guess because of all the chemicals. I'm not sure if back then they didn't have like the foam or whatever, the stuff to put a fire like that out. So it sort of just burned itself out after a while. But it was, that was kind of fun. Not fun, it was, when you're a kid, it was like...
Excitement.
It was excitement, yeah. Everybody's running around. Yeah.
You got any more stories of Fort Mary events?
Not that I could tell on camera, probably. No, it was a wonderful place to grow up. I mean, we always had something to do as kids. We were hunting, fishing, riding motorcycles, bicycles, swimming down at Penwell. And it was kind of good because there was a lot of kids around the same age. A few older as yourself, and then there was a few younger, and it was just a nice mix of people that lived here for a long time. And I mean, I wouldn't want to live anywhere else, to tell you the truth. In fact, when I was in the Navy, I was homesick. I joined the Navy because I was like, oh, I'm stuck in this little town, nothing to do here. I'm going to go out and see the world. Well, when I went out to see the world, I realized, you know what? The world ain't all that great. Port Mary's a little better. Mm-hmm. And I spent a lot of my leave and time coming back here. I used to bring my Navy friends with me because I was stationed in Connecticut, which, we get a weekend pass. And I would bring guys that, had lived in California or Georgia or wherever, and I would bring guys out here just for a home-cooked meal and go visit the Anderson Hotel, have a few drinks, go fishing, swimming, whatever time of year it was. Well, I told you earlier about the one guy I brought home. He was from the inner city and had never been to the country, ever. And I brought him home with me the one time, and we were camping out back up behind your place. By the apple orchard there, and he was kind of freaking out because of the noises, the hoot owls, the crickets, and thought the bears were going to get him. But at that time, we didn't really have any bears around here, But after he spent a couple days here, he loved it, and thanked me for the experience. He said he'd never experienced anything like it before in his life. First time he was ever out of the city, basically. Which was, and I said, well, this is one of the best places you're ever going to visit. We just had fun here.
We sure did.
Yeah.